Mali's coup leader and interim president is invited by the regional body ECOWAS to an emergency summit on Sunday. You're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha with me, Foliba Thibault. Also coming up, fears of a second volcanic eruption in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo send tens of thousands in search of shelter. The Palestinian Health Ministry says people injured by the bombardment of Gaza are to be transferred to the occupied West Bank for medical treatment. Protesting against Brazil's government, demonstrators angry about the handling of the coronavirus pandemic say they want Jair Bolsonaro out. Mali has a new president. His name is Assimi Goïta and is the colonel who led a military coup this weekend, the one that removed President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta last August. He had been serving as vice president. He takes over from Ban Dao. Earlier this week, Goïta ordered the arrest of Dao, his prime minister, and several transitional officials after a cabinet reshuffle excluded two military leaders. Dao was released only after he agreed to resign. Goïta is now promising to hand back power after elections set to take place early next year. The international community has threatened to impose sanctions. Goïta has been invited to an emergency meeting of West African leaders on Sunday to discuss the political turmoil in Mali. Nicholas Haak has more from the capital, Bamako.
Before attending this meeting, surely he'll also announce a new prime minister. He's asked the opposition, the M5 movement, the civil society movement that was behind the protest movement that led to the downfall of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta in August to find a prime minister, and certain names are being announced, such as Shogel Maiga, who is one of the leader of the M5. But of course, at that meeting, he's also accountable to the West African countries because there are soldiers on the ground from Togo, Benin, Ivory Coast, Senegal that are doing the jobs of the Malian soldiers dying on the front. There's many Chadian soldiers that have died trying to protect the Malian state from armed groups. So he's accountable to them. And since 2012, there's been 6,000 people that have died, 500,000 people displaced. So the new military junta, Assimi Goïta, has a lot of work on his hand, not only to protect the sovereignty of Mali, but also organize elections. There was a French military intervention in the Central African Republic, and we've seen a stepping down of French presence and a stepping up of Russian presence. Just over the weekend, 600 additional Russian military advisors were sent to the Central African Republic. And that has emboldened the military junta to look at other partners to work with in trying to re-establish the sovereignty of Mali.
In Democratic Republic of Congo, tens of thousands of people have left the city of Goma in the east after fears of a second volcanic eruption. Africa's most active volcano, Nyiragongo, roared back to life a week ago, killing dozens and destroying homes. Authorities have ordered the evacuation of parts of Goma, which is nearby. The UN says nearly 400,000 people are affected, with some escaping across the border to Rwanda. Malcolm Webb has more from Goma.
What we can see right here is exactly what those thousands of people fled from. In that direction, it's a bit hazy, but in that direction is Mount Nyiragongo. It's just outside this city of millions of people. And just under a week ago, it formed a split in its side, and then lava came gushing out in a river which cut through into the city here. And that's what we're looking at. These black rocks, some of them are still smouldering and smoking. These were red glowing liquid rock just a few days ago. I'm standing on the top of remains of a lucky building that just missed being destroyed, and on the other side you can see other suburbs of the city of Goma. But everything in between, everything that's under now this black volcanic rock, has been completely destroyed. In those centres where the displaced people have concentrated, in Sake, the town of Sake, here in Congo, also the town of Minova, that we understand so far that there's very little support indeed. People are sleeping in churches, sleeping in schools, some are sleeping out in the open, others are staying with relatives. The military governor for North Kivu, because at the moment there's it's called a state of siege here. Basically, the government declared martial law. The army is in control of everything. That's because of unrest by the conflict between armed groups and the government further to the north of here. And so the military is in charge. The military governor's spokesperson said that yesterday said that they are trying to bring more supplies to those people who have been displaced, thousands of people who are seeking shelter and urgently need food and water.
The U.S. plans to impose sanctions on Belarus. The White House says it's working on a list of targets within the government. It comes after Minsk diverted a passenger plane and forced it to land in order to arrest a dissident journalist. The U.S. is also suspending an agreement that allows Belarusian jets to fly in American airspace. Meanwhile, supporters of the detained journalist Roman Potrasevich are rallying in Warsaw, Poland to demand his release. Potrasevich works for the opposition site Nexta, based in the Polish capital. He's now been in custody in Belarus for a week. Exiled Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya says she fears for his life and hopes EU sanctions will be more severe against President Lukashenko. She sat down with Al Jazeera Step Aspen in Amsterdam.
My first thought was that they are going to torture him till death, because he is considered to be private enemy of Lukashenko, and
because of his work for Nexta.
Yes, of his journalism.
Were you surprised when you heard that he did such a thing, Lukashenko hijacking basically this plane? Were you surprised?
I was surprised and shocked, because I couldn't imagine that this regime will make international scandal just to kidnap one journalist. We see how far he can go just to looking for revenge. Of course, it influenced people, and people are a little bit more sensitive now, more scared, even in exile, understanding that they can be put in the boot of any car.
Are you scared yourself right now?
I can say that yes. Yes, but if it's your destiny, so what can you do? Nothing. You can't stop anyway. You have to fight.
Tikhanovskaya met with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte and Foreign Minister Sigrid Kaag to push for stricter sanctions. EU leaders described the forced landing of a Ryanair plane to arrest a journalist on board as a hijacking. The incident led them to impose a flight ban on Belarus and to consider economic sanctions.
It's a pity to admit that this time the situation concerns not only Belarusians, but citizens of European countries as well.
But it's kind of cynical, right? That after so many months of suffering in Belarus, that when a European plane has been forced to land, and suddenly Europe wakes up.
Some people can think that it's not because of the situation in Belarus, but only because of European citizens. Sanctions are going to be fast and wide. And
but how do you
difficult to admit this. We hope that it's still also because of sufferings of Belarusians.
What would be the most important sanction that Europe has to impose on Belarus? What exactly are you asking?
For sure, it will be targeted, very smart sanctions on state-owned organizations that are pockets of Lukashenko. Only lack of money will make him to release political prisoners, to start dialogue with mediators, could influence the situation.
But if Lukashenko doesn't have money, he tends to go to Russia, to President Putin, to ask for money. Isn't that the risk?
We understand that Lukashenko became a problem for Kremlin as well, and they would like to solve this problem, but they don't know how.
1 week on from the ceasefire, people injured in the Israeli siege on Gaza are now being moved to hospitals in the occupied West Bank. People in Gaza are also facing severe shortages of electricity and water, and thousands are still homeless.
We came here to serve our people. We came here to say no to the aggression. We came here to stand with our people in these dark times. We wanted to be here on the second or third day of the aggression, but we didn't have a permit. The special medical teams will play their role. We have a variety of surgeons, neurologists, and orthopedic surgeons. I'm here to salute all our people in the Gaza Strip for their steadfastness and resilience. A special respect to the medical teams here, who perform their duty like no other, work day and night in order to serve the needs of our people.
Yumna Al-Sayad has more from Gaza.
There is a delegation, a medical delegation, in addition to the Minister of Health, who has arrived from the West Bank to the Gaza Strip and now is visiting the hospitals and health facilities in the Gaza Strip. She came with her, the minister came with her, with this medical delegation to actually also operate on the wounded here due to the Israeli war. And now only one case has been so far transferred to Ramallah Medical Center. And but the minister said that all the West Bank hospitals are open to receive the wounded, but she will be doing a further effort to be able to receive these and transfer these wounded to the West Bank and to the hospitals of the West Bank. So far until now, this is how it's been going. Of course, some aid came in with the minister regarding hospitals because of the acute shortage in medications that the hospitals of Gaza have been suffering from.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera. A black community in the U.S. state of Oklahoma says it's still waiting for justice a century after one of the worst racial massacres in American history. And prize fighters, we meet an armed group which says it's defending a Mexican town against the feared drug cartel.
Hello, I'm pleased to say we've got some drier weather coming in across Japan over the next couple of days. That's the good news. You can see somewhat clearer skies just coming through here, but follow the Miuntain front, the seasonal rains, down into southern parts of China. More pulses of very wet weather coming in here then. We are going to see it staying very unsettled between the Yangtze and the Pearl River then as a result of that. And that same area, cloud and rain, pulsing out across the open waters as we go on through Monday. Taiwan also seeing some of that heavier rain. As you can see, largely dry there in Japan. 1 or 2 showers of possibility over towards Tokyo, 25 Celsius. Some wetter weather will come back in across northern areas of China, just sliding through Beijing towards the Yellow Sea, and that'll gradually make its way further eastwards over the next day or two. Some wet weather pushing towards eastern parts of the Philippines over the next day or two. You can see this clutch of storms there, a little circulation brewing up. I don't think it'll develop into a tropical storm, but it will still bring some very heavy rain into central and southern parts of the Philippines. Joins up with the heavy rain that we have across southern parts of Myanmar, around the Nicobar Islands, the Andaman Islands, largely dry across that eastern side of India now. The remnants of our old cyclone still bringing some very heavy rain up towards the far north and Nepal.
Warring drug cartels, armed vigilante groups, and a population caught in the middle.
What's your reason for being in Michoacán? Why do you want this territory?
I'm reporting from an epicenter of Mexico's violence to investigate. Can an upcoming election change anything for people living here?
We've just had a gunshot really close to where we were there in the Liverpool Park. So we're getting out as fast as we can.
Join me, John Holman, for the full report on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. A recap of our top stories on Al Jazeera. Mali's constitutional court has named Colonel Assimi Goïta, who led a military coup this week, as the interim president. Despite the criticism over the political turmoil, West African leaders have invited Goïta to an emergency summit on Sunday. Tens of thousands of people in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo are seeking shelter as fears grow of a possible second volcanic eruption. Last week, the Nyiragongo volcano erupted, killing dozens and displacing more than 400,000 people from nearby Goma. And a week on from the ceasefire, people injured in Israeli bombardment of Gaza are now being moved to hospitals in the occupied West Bank. Thousands of people are still without power and running water in Gaza. Let's head to Brazil now, where people are protesting against the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. These are live pictures from Rio de Janeiro. Demonstrators are calling for the impeachment of President Jair Bolsonaro. He's been criticized for repeatedly downplaying the risk of COVID-19 and is now being investigated by the Senate. Let's go live to Rio de Janeiro and Monica Yanakiev, who's among protesters for us today. Monica, tell us about where you are and how big the crowds are.
Well, we're right now in the center of Rio de Janeiro. Many people have been showing up since 9 o'clock in the morning here, Rio time. And the left has been reticent about taking to the streets because they wanted to show a difference in relationship to President Jair Bolsonaro, whom they criticized for downplaying the virus, not wearing a mask, delaying the vaccination campaign, but now they've said...
Apologies, we've lost our connection to Monica Yanakiev there, who was telling us about the anti-government demonstrations underway right now in Brazil, in many cities, including Rio de Janeiro, where you see these live pictures from protesters demanding that President Jair Bolsonaro step down over his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. We will be following these demonstrations for you throughout the day here on Al Jazeera. Now, in Canada, the remains of 215 Indigenous children have been found at a site of a former boarding school in British Columbia. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called the discovery heartbreaking. Victoria Gatenby has the story.
These are some of the 150,000 Indigenous children who attended so-called residential schools in Canada between the 1840s and 1990s. Many were forcibly taken from their parents and there was widespread abuse. Some lived here at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia, where the remains of 215 children have just been discovered. Some of the children who died were as young as 3.
There's nothing more painful in life than losing a child. My heart breaks today thinking of all the loving parents who never saw their children return home and who were never granted the dignity of knowing what happened.
It's a discovery that Canada's Prime Minister has described as a painful reminder of a shameful chapter in his country's history. The Canadian government formally apologised for the abuse at these schools in 2008. And years later, an official inquiry by a Truth and Reconciliation Commission into the residential school system concluded it amounted to cultural genocide against Indigenous communities.
The residential schools were opened with the sole purpose of removing the Indian from the child. It was to assimilate Indigenous people in Canada. And essentially, in the words of one of the superintendents at the time, was to get rid of the Indian problem.
Members of Canada's Indigenous community say they're in touch with the coroner and are contacting families of children who attended the school. For now, though, they say they still have more questions than answers. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
U.S. President Joe Biden has unveiled his first major budget, increasing federal spending to $6 trillion. The plan aims to provide billions for roads and bridges, education, and combating climate change. It also includes a number of social spending initiatives for the poor and middle class. The big price tag will be partially covered by an increase in taxes on the rich and big business. Meanwhile, Republicans in the U.S. Senate have launched an inquiry into the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill by Donald Trump's supporters. Democrats and some moderate Republicans had wanted to set up an independent commission to look into the attack. 54 senators voted in favor, short of the 60 needed to advance the legislation. Now, the U.S. is marking the 100th anniversary of what's thought to be the worst incident of racial violence in American history. 300 people were killed in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 when white Americans destroyed the nation's most prosperous black-owned business district. Survivors have taken part in a commemoration rally, but a bigger event has been cancelled. Shia Bratanzi is in Tulsa and explains why.
The last 3 survivors of what's now called the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 are still fighting for justice.
We have to live with each other.
After 100 years of not being compensated for all that they lost when a white mob backed by city and state authorities burnt down the black Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa, they're now in a battle over an attempt to cash in on the atrocity. And this week they achieved a victory, the cancellation of a commemorative concert headlined by Grammy Award winner John Legend at this baseball field built on land where once black houses and businesses stood. The concert was organized by the Tulsa Centennial Commission for its commemoration entitled Greenwood Rising. It has sought no input from the survivors. What it has sought is millions of dollars of corporate sponsorship, $30 million alone for a museum documenting the massacre. And the commission is clear, its goal is the gentrification of Greenwood and the area's repurposing as a site of what it calls cultural tourism. But the commission, supported by city and state officials, has refused financially to compensate or even support reparations for the massacre's survivors.
It is not about making Tulsa look good. It is not about cultural tourism. It is about the people and the justice they have been waiting on for 100 years.
The Greenwood district of Tulsa was known in the early 20th century as the Black Wall Street, teeming with prosperous homes and businesses, a place where the city's black community could live without fear. But over the course of May 31st and June the 1st, a white mob burnt the neighborhood down, killing some 300 residents and forcing thousands to flee, encouraged by city and state authorities eager to redevelop the land. Memories are still vivid for those who remain.
I remember running outside of our house. I just passed dead bodies. It wasn't a pretty sight. I still see it today in my mind 100 years later.
For decades, what's thought to be the U.S.'s worst racist massacre wasn't taught in schools or even mentioned as part of a cover-up. But since the 90s, there has been growing awareness of the crime. Now, brass packs line the streets of the former black neighborhood, showing what was lost. Now the survivors want nothing to do with the corporate Greenwood Rising commemoration.
They have raised more than $30 million and have refused to share any with me or the other 2 survivors. They have used my name to further their fundraising goals without my permission.
A group called Justice for Greenwood has organized its own commemorative events like this march with the survivors. They had long argued that the official ceremonies were being overseen by the direct descendants of those who burnt down Black Wall Street in the first place. For those fighting for justice for Greenwood, this commemoration has vividly demonstrated just how little has changed in the 100 years since a white mob, backed by city authorities, looted its black population. Shia Bratanzi, Al Jazeera, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
The Mexican state of Michoacan is at the center of a turf war between a powerful drug cartel and self-described defense groups. The state, like other parts of the country, will vote in local elections next month, and it's been a violent run-up. In his second report from Michoacan, John Holman looks at how the government seems to have left people to fend for themselves.
A hillside bunker in the town of Tepalcatepec, southwest Mexico. Thick walls and a trench across the ridge. It's made for action. But it's not filled with the army or police. This is a sentry point operated by the town's so-called self-defense group.
He's shooting, and then I take position. I shoot, and then the next person comes up to shoot.
It's just one of their fortifications. Currently, they're fighting the Jalisco New Generation cartel, and they're on high alert.
I've actually never seen a checkpoint like this by a group that's not the army in Mexico. You've got like the chicane up there that you just saw that car going down. and then you've got people checking all the cars. The group have actually told us as well that they've got people waiting in the hills around this, snipers as well looking down, and you can see all of these tyres that are here are filled with dirt as well to stop bullets.
Self-defense groups became synonymous with Michoacan 8 years ago, when people rose up against rapacious gangs after authorities couldn't or wouldn't defend them. But this is the problem. A lot of people say that over years of fighting criminals, many of them have gone rotten too. Commander Sierra has given us the tour. I asked him about the accusations, and I expected him to deny them. He surprised me.
Yes, we move drugs. Of course, everyone's free. If I want to buy a kilo of coke, put it inside the battery of a truck and send it to the U.S., that's my business. Crime, the cartels, they rob you, they kidnap you, they extort you, they kill you. That's different. If someone in Tepeque says the self-defense groups extort them, that's not true. That doesn't exist.
He sees no contradiction between a legitimate self-defense group and a drug trafficking ring, or in operating both using illegal guns.
Look, personally, I buy them in the United States. I've got friends and acquaintances there who buy them.
So you cross over with guns?
Other people, but obviously with them hidden. Some have got their deals with customs as well, who like the money.
That iron river running from the US is one of the prime drivers of violence in Mexico, but neither local nor federal authorities have dismantled the defense force. Their authority is shaky at best in a region long left to its own devices. And many of Tepalcatepec's townspeople support or at least put up with the fighters. They faced extortion and terror before, but now at least their town is peaceful. With that support, the group wield enormous local power, able to search and detain at will. They suspect that this young man is a Jalisco cartel soldier. When they find a small amount of drugs on him, he's arrested. They told us he'd be sent to a rehab center. But before then, this. A souvenir and testament to their authority. To me, it also looks uncomfortably like the photos posted by cartels across the country. And that's the paradox in a region where the government is just a bit player and the forces of law and order include drug trafficking, all-powerful vigilantes. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Tepalcatepec.
And you can watch the premiere of John Holman's new special, The Full Report, Living in Mexico's Kill Zone at 19:30 GMT on Sunday right here on Al Jazeera. Now, the number of smokers around the world has reached an all-time high. A study in the Lancet Medical Journal found 1.1 billion people smoked in 2019. Population growth and young people picking up the habit outstripped efforts to reduce the overall number. That same year, smoking killed nearly 8 million people. 10 countries make up 2/3 of the world's smokers, including China, India, Indonesia, and the US. 1 in 3 tobacco users, or about 341 million, are in China. Dr. Oscar Allen is the Chief of Programs and Services for the National Association of County and City Health Officials based in Washington, D.C. He says countries aren't investing enough money to help people quit smoking.
Smoking the traditional cigarette has kind of fallen out of favor. But we've seen a rise in other tobacco products that we estimate has really taken a turn with why folks have really been using more of these tobacco products in an alarming fashion, whether they be electronic cigarettes, of course, e-cigars, heated tobacco products. There's so many different aspects that folks go to right now for smoking, which unfortunately we're seeing this unremarkable rise. We really don't want to be going to that direction. We're still seeing a reduction in some cases, but an increase in the adolescent and the teen population. But I think another interesting point that is very important to realize, just in the U.S. alone, 2019 found about $8.2 billion spent by tobacco companies to market their products. $8.2 billion, which is roughly about 22.5 million each day, roughly $1 million per hour. So imagine the strength of the impact of that marketing campaign on a community, as you mentioned, where not much money is being spent to counter these effects. So there's several mitigating factors that we're seeing, especially in high-income populations. Really, we have to meet these populations and these demographics where they're most highly influenced. And what has been shown from this study is really that if you're able to get them before they hit their mid-20s, they're less likely to take up smoking the first time.
Now, the big day is here. Manchester City play Chelsea in the UEFA Champions League final. City hope to win the competition for the first time, while Chelsea were last crowned European champions back in 2012. The venue was moved from Istanbul to Porto in Portugal to allow players and fans to attend without having to quarantine on their return home. Hello again, I'm Fuli Batibo with the headlines on Al Jazeera. Mali's constitutional court has named Colonel Assimi Goïta, who led a military coup this week, as the interim president. Despite the criticism over the political turmoil, West African leaders have invited Goïta to an emergency meeting. Nicholas Hack has more from Bamako.
He will absolutely attend this meeting. It gives legitimacy and credence to this latest move made by following the constitutional court that confirmed that he is the new president of Mali. But before attending this meeting, surely he'll also announce a new prime minister. He's asked the opposition, the M5 movement, the civil society movement that was behind the protest movement that led to the downfall of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta in August, to find a prime minister.
Tens of thousands of people in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo are seeking shelter as years grow of a possible second volcanic eruption. Last week, Nyiragongo erupted, killing dozens and displacing more than 400,000 people from nearby Goma. A week on from the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, people injured in the Israeli bombardment of Gaza are being moved to hospitals in the occupied West Bank. Thousands of people are still without power and running water in Gaza. The White House says it will impose sanctions on Belarus and is working on a list of targets within the Belarusian government. This comes after Belarusian authorities diverted a passenger plane and forced it to land in order to arrest a dissident journalist. And supporters of the detained journalist Roman Petrasevich are rallying in Warsaw to demand his release. Petrasevich works for the opposition site Nexa, based in Poland's capital. You're up to date with the headlines on Al Jazeera. Rob Matheson will have more news for you right after the stream.
Talk to Al Jazeera. We ask the army
who were attacking Rohingya, and now they're attacking everyone in Myanmar. Do you regret